We start on the introductions to the Holy Qur'an, the the Colophons. Chapter 1, Al-Fatiha, the opening, revealed at Mecca, 7 verses. The Fatiha, or the opening, is known under various other names. It is spoken of as the 7 oft-repeated verses in Al-Quran itself, 1587, because its 7 verses are constantly repeated by every Muslim in his prayers. It is spoken of as the Fatihat al-Kitab, or the opening of the book, in a saying of the Holy Prophet, in which it is said that no prayer is complete without the recitation of Fatihat al-Kitab, Bukhari 10:95. Hence, it is also called Surat al-Salat, i.e., the chapter of prayer being essential to every prayer, whether performed in congregation or in private. It is also called Surat al-Dua, the chapter of supplication, because the entire chapters of supplication are a prayer to the great master, God, the master of all. It is also known as al-Kitab, i.e., the basis of the book, because it contains the whole of Al-Quran, as it were, in a nutshell. Some of the other names given to this chapter are the praise, the thanksgiving, the foundation, the treasure, the whole, the sufficient, the healer, and the healing. Al-Fatiha contains several verses in a single section and was revealed at Mecca, being without a doubt one of the earliest revelations. It is a fact that the Fatiha formed an essential part of the Muslim prayers from the earliest days when prayer was made obligatory, and there is a vast mass of evidence showing that this happened very early after the Prophet's call. For not only is the fact referred to in the earliest revelations, such as the 73rd chapter, but there are also other historical incidents showing that prayer was observed by the earliest Muslim converts. Now, the various elements of the prayer were learned over time as well. The Qur'an was learned over time. The elements of the prayer were not all initially instituted. The chapter is headed by the words Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. That's 19 letters. In Arabic it's 19 letters. And head every one of the other 113 chapters of the Holy Quran, with the exception of one only, the 9th, while the same sentence occurs once in the middle of the chapter. These in Surah 27, 8:30, and thus occurring 114 times in Al-Quran, the phrase has, besides, acquired such a wide usage among the Muslimin that it is the first thing which a Muslim child learns, and in his everyday affairs, the Bismillah is the first word which a Muslim utters. The Bismillah is the quintessence of the chapter Fatiha, in the same meaning as the latter is the quintessence of the Quran itself. By commencing every important affair with the Bismillah, the Muslim in fact shows, in the midst of his everyday life affairs, that the right attitude of the human mind towards the great mind of the universe is that it should always seek a support in the Mighty One, who is the source of all strength, and faith in God thus finds expression in the practical life of a Muslim in a manner unapproached anywhere else in the history of religion. The Fatiha has a special importance as a prayer. Its oft-repeated 7 verses constitute the prayer for guidance of every Muslim at least 32 times a day, and therefore it has a much greater importance for him than the Lord's Prayer for a Christian. There is another difference too. The latter is instructed to pray for the coming of the kingdom of God, whereas the Muslim is instructed to seek for his right place in that kingdom which had already come. The hint to doubt being that the coming of the prophet was really the advent of the kingdom of God, and about whose approach Jesus preached to his followers. Mark 1:15. The prayer contained in this chapter is the sublimest of all the prayers that exist in Al-Quran itself. A chorus of praise has gone forth for it from the greatest detractors of the Holy Quran. The entire chapter is composed of 7 verses, the first 3 of which speak of the 4 chief divine attributes, viz. Providence, beneficence, mercy, and requital, thus giving expression to the grandeur and praise of the divine being, and the last 3 lay open before the great Maker the earnest desire of man's soul to walk in righteousness without stumbling on either side, while the middle one is expressive of man's entire dependence on Allah. The attributes referred to are those which disclose Allah's all-encompassing beneficence and care, and his unbounded love for all of his creatures, and the ideal to which the soul is made to aspire is the highest to which man can rise, the path of righteousness, the path of grace, and the path in which there is no stumbling. Thus, on one hand, the narrow views that the divine being was the lord of a particular nation are swept off before the mention of his equal providence and equal love for all mankind, nay, for all the creatures that exist in all the worlds, and, on the other, the soul is made to aspire to the great spiritual eminence to which arose those to whom Allah was gracious, the prophets, the truthful, the faithful, and the righteous. 469. One would in vain turn over the pages of sacred books to find anything approachable. The grand and sublime ideas contained in this chapter of the Holy Quran, as I have stated, the Fatiha is the quintessence of the whole of Al-Quran, for the Quran is a book which declares the glory of God and teaches the right way to man, and both these themes find full expression in the Fatiha. The fundamental principles of faith, the prime attributes of the divine being, which are the basis for all other attributes, the relation which ought to hold between man and his Creator, are all contained in their essence in the 7 short sentences of which this wonderful chapter is made up. And to crown all, this chapter opens with the broadest possible conception of the lordship of the divine being and the brotherhood of man, nay, of the oneness of all creation, for the unity of creation necessarily follows the unity of the Creator. And there's a bunch of notes with that one. Chapter 2, Al-Baqarah, the cow, revealed at Medina, 40 sections, 286 verses. The name of this chapter is taken from the story narrated in verse 66 to 71 regarding the slaughter of a cow, as this chapter deals chiefly with the Jews, and as cow worshippers, as shown in footnotes 84 and 108, was a particular form of idolatry which took a hold among the Jews, because of some of the Baal worship, some of the Hathor worship. It's hard to tell what exactly. Some of the Mithraic stuff, possibly, which big surprise, Christianity became Mithraism became the religion that Judaism blended into to form a separate group entirely. Christianity. The importance of that incident seems to have been rightly estimated in giving this chapter the name it bears. This chapter deals mainly with the Jews and their contentions against Islam, and hence it is that much of the legislation, details of which necessarily differ from the Jewish law, and most of the Jewish objections to the prophethood of Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, are dealt with in this chapter. The chapter opens with a brief statement of the fundamental principles of Islam, after the meaning and consequences of their acceptance or rejection in the first section, and dealing with leper profession in the second, draws an inference of the truth from those principles, and more particularly of the divine unity, by referring to the work of God and nature in the third. The fourth section proceeds to show that man is endowed with vast capabilities, but needs divine revelation for his perfection, and thus is illustrated in the story of Adam. The fifth section speaks of the Israelites who are told how Al-Quran fulfills the prophecies met with in their books, and others have pointed out it's much more than just, stuff that has made its way into the Bible. And the next 2 sections are devoted to the divine favors to them and their stubbornness being followed by 3 others which speak of their degeneration, their tendency to cow worship, their hard-heartedness, and their religion of covetance. The 11th section speaks of their objections to the Holy Prophet, and the 12th refers to their great enmity and of their plans against him. The 13th states that former scriptures are abrogated and a better and more advanced code is given in Islam, the religion of entire submission. The next section points out that the partial good is met with in all religions, but it is only in Islam that religion attains perfection. The 15th reminds the Israelites of the covenant with Abraham, which required the raising of a prophet from among the Ishmaelites, being followed by another dealing with the religion of the great patriarch. The subject of the Kaaba, the house built by Abraham, as the new Qibla, is thus introduced, and the next 2 sections, while declaring the Kaaba to be the new center of spiritual activity, also give reasons for the change. The 19th warns that Muslimin must undergo hard trials to establish the truth, and that it will ultimately triumph. It is made clear in the 20th section certain minor differences with the Jewish law are then introduced as against the common principle of the doctrine of unity, and thus the laws relating to food, retaliation, bequest, fasting, fighting, pilgrimage, wine, gambling, wine isn't all intoxicants, gambling, orphans, marital obligations, divorce, and widowhood are discussed in the 11 sections that follow. The next 2, the 32nd and the 33rd, make a reversion to the subject of fighting, which was necessary if the Muslimin would escape national death, and illustrations are given from Israelite history. We are then told in the 34th section of the mighty power of God to give to the dead, to give life to the dead, and the Muslimin are told that they should not use compulsion in the matter of religion, as their opponents had done. 2 instances are then quoted in the following section, one from the history of Abraham and the other from the Israelite history, showing how dead nations are raised to life. But national growth and prosperity, we are immediately told in the 36th and the 37th sections, depend on acts of sacrifice, and every penny spent in the cause of truth yields 700-fold, and even much more fruit. The Muslimin, being thus promised abundance of wealth as the result of their sacrifices, are warned in the following section against usurious dealings, which breed an inordinate love of wealth. For the amassing of wealth was not the goal of Muslim life. They are at the same time told in the 39th section to guard their property rights by the employment of writing in their transactions and securing evidence. In conclusion, they are taught a prayer for the ultimate triumph of truth. Thus we find no break in the continuity of the subject, and the change, whenever necessary, is introduced quite naturally. There is a clear connection between this chapter and the last one. There, in the concluding words, is a prayer for being guided on the right path. 1:5. While here that guidance is afforded in the opening words, this book, there is no doubt in it, is a guide. Verse 2. Well, guide for those who believe in the unseen. So Islam's not just some ideology, it's a mythology, because it has this element, and it has an element of meaning, so that also connects to mythology. It's not the same. Mythology and something that's not true is not the same thing. Because if it's just not true, we just call it fiction. Verse 2. I know there's confusion in the words, so I've said something when bringing that up. But though this chapter follows the Fatiha, it is really the first chapter, because the Fatiha is placed at the head, in the essence of the whole Qur'an. This affords very clear evidence of the wisdom displayed in the arrangement of the chapters of the Holy Book, for this chapter fittingly opens with the prelude as to the object which is aimed at in the revelation of the Holy Qur'an, and it contains in its very opening verses the fundamental principles of the Islamic religion, which are also in fact the fundamental principles which can form the basis of the natural religion of humanity. These principles are 5 in number, 3 of them containing theoretical ordinances or articles of belief, and 2 containing practical ordinances or principles of action. The theoretical ordinances are belief in the unseen, i.e., Allah, in divine revelation to the Holy Prophet, as well as the prophets before him, the life to come, and this chapter hints at the jinn and the malaika as 2 other type of created beings, and human beings have their soul. And on the practical side is mentioned prayer, which is the source from which springs true divine love and charity in its broadest sense. The result of the acceptance of these fundamental principles is mentioned in verse 5, being guidance in the right direction and success. Similarly, it is with reiteration of the broad principles with Islamic faith and with prayer for the triumph of the truth that the chapter ends, and the whole of the chapter is really an illustration of the truth of the principles enunciated in its beginning. This chapter was revealed in Medina and belongs to the earliest Medina revelations. The main portion of it belongs to the 1st and 2nd years of the Hijrah, but it also contains verses which were revealed later, some of them towards the close of the Prophet's life. And this chapter here also makes clear the issue of, yes, you believe, but then you want faith, and you want knowledge, and so everybody's working towards their own realizations. And prayer is just, it's the foundation of the actualizations. But it goes on.